Imagine booking an Airbnb, a place that promises comfort, privacy, and safety. You lock the doors, close the curtains, and finally let yourself relax. But what if I told you someone was watching? What if behind those walls or under the same roof, a stranger was waiting for the right moment to step out of the dark? Tonight, I'll share with you 3 true Airbnb horror stories that prove sometimes the scariest part of your trip isn't outside the house. It's already inside. If you have the courage, watch until the very end. Story 1. The Cabin in the Woods by Parker. I booked an Airbnb in the spring of 2022. It was supposed to be a simple getaway, just a small wooden cabin tucked inside a forest, far from the noise of my everyday life. The owner had built several identical cabins scattered across his property, each separated by thick trees and faint, unmarked trails. To me, it sounded perfect. I didn't have much of a plan, no tours, no hiking checklist, no agenda, just me, a cabin, and the woods. The first night was peaceful, fire crackling in the fireplace, coffee in hand, the sound of the wind brushing through the trees. It felt like I had stepped into one of those calming wilderness retreats, but the next evening changed everything. That day I slept in late, made breakfast, and spent hours lazing by the fire. Just before sunset, I decided to take a walk. I grabbed a hoodie and followed a narrow trail that cut into the woods behind my cabin. I assumed it would loop around to another cabin, maybe even circle back. At first, it was relaxing. The air was crisp, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple, but as the trees grew denser, I noticed something. Out in the distance, maybe 200 or 300 yards, stood 2 men. They weren't walking, they weren't talking. They just stood there, shoulder to shoulder, staring down at something on the ground, completely silent. I slowed my pace but kept moving, telling myself they were just other guests exploring the forest. Still, the way they stood, motionless, silent, made my stomach twist. Eventually, the trees swallowed them from view, and I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. But the trail didn't loop like I thought. It stretched deeper into the woods, straight and endless, and the further I walked, the more uneasy I became. Finally, I decided to turn back. That's when I heard it. A scream. Not human, not animal, something in between. It echoed through the trees, vibrating in my chest, like an elk call twisted into something unearthly. I whipped around. The 2 men were now on the trail, behind me. Closer, maybe 150 yards away, standing still, facing me. My blood ran cold. For 10 long seconds, I couldn't move. Then I slowly stepped backward, and as I did, the men silently walked off the trail, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. I froze there for minutes, heart racing, terrified of walking past where they had been. Finally, when the forest was silent again, I hurried back to the cabin, locking the door behind me. I almost texted the Airbnb host, but what would I say? Hey, I saw 2 guys staring at me in the woods? It sounded insane. So I kept quiet, lit the fireplace, and tried to calm down. By nightfall, the forest outside was pitch black. I told myself I was safe now. But then, the scream came again. That same distorted bellow echoing through the woods. I looked out the back window, but all I saw were faint outlines of trees swaying in the dark. My stomach dropped. The cabin walls suddenly felt paper thin, like anything out there could be right next to me, and I wouldn't know. An hour later, just when I was starting to settle, boots thumped against the front porch. Heavy footsteps, right outside my door. I held my breath. The steps stopped. Silence. Yet and then, knock, slow, deliberate. My knees nearly gave out as I crept to the peephole, and there they were. The 2 men. Story 2. The House Too Big by Anonymous. Last year, I had just gotten a promotion at work. The new position meant traveling all over the country. Hotels, resorts, Airbnbs, you name it, I stayed there. At first it was exciting, new cities every week. But after a few months, the novelty wore off. Places began to blur together. Until one trip. One Airbnb. One night I will never forget. That week, I flew into a small city, and, as usual, my company booked the stay for me. I figured it would be another ordinary place. But when I arrived at nearly 1 in the morning, headlights sweeping across the driveway, I froze. The house was massive, 4, maybe 5,000 square feet. A sprawling lawn, tall hedges, a porch stretching across the front. This wasn't just an Airbnb. It was a mansion. I double-checked the address 3 times. It was right. Dragging my bags inside, my excitement dulled almost immediately. The interior was old-fashioned. Heavy curtains, floral wallpaper, antique furniture. It was nice, but it didn't feel like me. Still, it was too late to care. I carried my suitcase upstairs, collapsed onto the bed, and let exhaustion take over. That's when I noticed it. The house was noisy. Every few seconds, creaks in the walls, faint thumps above or below, like the whole structure was breathing. I told myself big houses probably just sounded like this. I was a light sleeper though, and the noises kept me awake until finally I got up for water. The moment I stepped downstairs, the sound stopped. Completely. No creaks, no thumps, nothing. I grabbed a glass in silence, the quiet pressing against my ears. I went back to bed, unsettled, but eventually drifted off. The next morning was routine: shower, rush out the door, long day at work. I barely spent half an hour in the house before leaving. That night, after drinks with coworkers, I returned close to midnight. Tea. Sinking into the living room sofa, I decided to finally explore. I wandered through dining rooms, studies, and extra bedrooms, empty spaces I'd never use. What struck me, though, was how lived in it felt. Cushions scattered on the couch, a chair left out in the kitchen, nothing messy but wrong, as if someone had just been here. I pushed the kitchen chair back under the table and told myself I was imagining things. Then I headed upstairs, showered, and slid into bed. I was seconds from sleep when the noises began again. Creak, step, another step. Not random groans of wood this time. These were footsteps, slow, deliberate, directly beneath my room. I sat upright, blood rushing in my ears. Then I heard something else, the faint slam of a cabinet, another footstep. I crept into the hallway, listening. The sounds didn't stop. They grew clearer. Someone was walking below me. My chest tightened as I tiptoed down the stairs. Every step I took, the sounds paused, like whoever it was knew I was there. I reached the bottom and noticed a dim light spilling from the kitchen. I swore I had turned off every light earlier. I edged closer, my heart hammering, and then I saw it. The chair, pulled out again, and beyond it, in the darkness of the far room, a figure. Someone, tall, unmoving, was leaning around the corner, head tilted, eyes locked on me. We stared at each other for one unbearable moment before he jerked back, vanishing behind the wall. I heard a door slam. Adrenaline took over. I ran forward, flicking on every light, searching, but there was no one, no open door, no sign of anyone escaping. Panicked, I bolted upstairs, grabbed my phone, and sprinted outside. I called the police from my car, shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. When officers arrived, I explained everything: the footsteps, the figure, the slamming door, but the host insisted, Tikia. Here were no doors where I claimed to have heard one, no entryways, no exits, nothing. And without evidence, without seeing the man's face, there was nothing more they could do. Story 3. The Hidden Door, by Anonymous. I had been on the road for weeks, working long shifts, sleeping in random hotels and cheap rentals. By the time I reached my next stop, all I wanted was rest. The Airbnb looked perfect on the listing, spacious, quiet, and just outside the city. The pictures showed a cozy living room, a clean kitchen, and a bedroom with warm lighting. When I arrived, though, something felt off. The place was bigger than expected. Long hallways stretched deeper than the pictures showed. The ceilings were higher, the rooms darker. The air inside carried a strange smell, damp wood mixed with something metallic. But I brushed it off. It had been a long drive, and exhaustion dulled my nerves. The host had left a note. "Make yourself at home. Everything you need is here." That night, I cooked a small meal, unpacked, and sat on the couch scrolling through my phone. That's when I noticed the first detail that didn't match the listing. In the corner of the living room was a door, painted the same color as the wall, easy to miss unless you were looking for it. I remembered the photos. There had been no door in that spot. Curious, I walked over and touched the handle. It was locked. For a moment, I stood there in silence, pressing my ear against it. Nothing. No sound at all. I told myself it was probably a storage closet, maybe the host's personal space. Still, unease crept over me. Why hide it from the pictures? Why disguise it to blend in with the wall? I tried to shake it off, but the feeling lingered as I went to bed. Sometime past midnight, I woke up to a noise. Click, click, metal on metal. A lock. I held my breath, listening in the darkness. Then came another sound, the faint creak of a door opening. The hidden door. I crept out of bed, every hair on my body standing on end. The hallway light switch was just outside my room. I reached for it, flicked it on, and froze. The door in the living room was ajar. Only a few inches, but enough. Enough to see a sliver of blackness behind it. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My eyes locked on that narrow crack until I was sure, absolutely sure, I saw movement. Someone was standing there, watching me from the dark. I bolted back into my room, slammed the door, and locked it. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. Whispering into the receiver, I told the dispatcher someone had broken into my Airbnb. Minutes dragged like hours. I could hear faint, deliberate footsteps outside my door. Slow, careful. By the time police arrived, the footsteps had vanished. The officers searched the entire house. They checked the hidden door first, but when they tried the handle, it was locked again, secure, as if it had never been touched. One officer even smiled faintly, telling me it was probably just my imagination, maybe stress from traveling too much. But then, as we were leaving, the other officer crouched down, running his hand along the frame of the hidden door. He frowned. The paint was fresh, too fresh. The wood around the lock had scratches, marks where it had clearly been opened, many times. They pried the door open. Behind it was a narrow stairwell, leading down into a basement the host had never mentioned, and in that basement, a mattress, a half-empty bottle of water, and a pile of clothes, none of them mine. Someone had been living there, watching me, waiting for me to sleep. I left that night and never looked back. The host deleted their listing days later, but sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear it, that lock clicking in the dark.